At 8:27 p.m. on Friday, January 16, 2026, the veneer of the American dream didn't just crack. It shattered on the cold concrete of the 2,900 block of Main Street in Santa Monica. In one of the wealthiest zip codes in the nation, amidst the soft glow of high-end boutiques and the hum of luxury electric vehicles, a woman stripped of everything, clothes, shelter, and dignity, collapsed onto the sidewalk. She wasn't just seeking rest, she was in labor. While pedestrians froze in a mixture of horror and paralysis, biology took its course, right there on the pavement. By the time the Santa Monica Fire Department arrived minutes later, the baby was already entering the world, forcing first responders to cut the umbilical cord under the glare of streetlights, rather than the sterile lamps of a maternity ward. This wasn't a scene from a dystopian film or a war-torn region. This was a Friday night in California, the world's fifth largest economy in the year 2026. This singular, visceral moment has become the defining image of a new American reality. A reality where the gap between the ultra-rich and the destitute has become so wide that new life enters the world on the asphalt of a shopping district, while billions of dollars in government spending vanish into a bureaucratic void. This incident on Main Street is not an anomaly. It is the inevitable mathematical result of a system in total collapse. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we have to look past the shock of the headline and into the terrifying data that defines January 2026. Despite Governor Gavin Newsom's administration pouring a staggering $37 billion into homelessness programs since 2019, the crisis has not only persisted, it has mutated. We are witnessing a catastrophic disconnect between spending and results. While the state touts a recent 9% reduction in unsheltered homelessness, the reality on the ground tells a much darker story. The shelter system is mathematically broken. In 2024 alone, while the system added roughly 60,000 new beds, over 600,000 people entered homelessness for the first time. This creates a shelter gap so massive that it functions like a black hole, swallowing entire families, the elderly, and now newborn infants. When a woman gives birth on a sidewalk in a city that charges premium rents for ocean views, it is proof that the safety net hasn't just frayed, it has been incinerated. The demographic profile of those hitting the pavement in 2026 has shifted dramatically, challenging every stereotype the public holds about the unhoused. Just days after the sidewalk birth, another young woman, 21-year-old Nina Walker, was found wandering the same affluent streets of Santa Monica, shoeless and disoriented. She wasn't a long-term drug addict or a product of the foster system. She was a young woman from New Mexico, fleeing domestic abuse, who had arrived in California with dreams of performing, only to be chewed up by an unforgiving housing market. Her story represents a terrifying new trend, the displacement of the young and the hopeful. With California's poverty rate now standing at 17.7%, tying with Louisiana for the highest in the nation when adjusted for the cost of living, the state has become a trap. It lures people in with the promise of the Golden State myth, only to leave them barefoot on the boardwalk when the math of survival no longer adds up. But the crisis of 2026 is not confined to the sidewalks of California. It is hiding in the parking lots of Silicon Valley and the side streets of suburban America. We are currently witnessing the explosion of the working homeless, a class of citizens who clock into full-time jobs by day and retreat to the back seats of their sedans by night. Reports from early 2026 indicate that an estimated 1.2 million employed Americans are now living in vehicles. These are not van life influencers seeking adventure. These are Amazon warehouse workers, Uber drivers, and even entry-level tech employees who have been priced out of civilization. In the shadow of the tech giants, where AI is rapidly restructuring the economy, the people building the infrastructure cannot afford a roof over their heads. They shower at 24-hour gyms, use public Wi-Fi to file reports, and sleep with one eye open, terrified of the tow truck, the modern-day grim reaper that can seize their home and their transportation in a single hook. The economic winds driving this homelessness crisis are being whipped into a storm by a massive structural shift in the corporate labor market. January 2026 has brought a bloodbath in the tech and retail sectors. We are seeing a white-collar purge as major corporations pivot aggressively toward artificial intelligence. Amazon, Intel, and Microsoft are shedding layers of middle management and legacy roles, with over 165,000 job cuts announced in the first quarter alone. Amazon's CEO has explicitly targeted bureaucracy, a euphemism for human workers who are no longer viewed as assets but as tax liabilities in the age of automation. These layoffs are not temporary furloughs, they are permanent erasures of the middle class. When a $150,000 a year project manager loses their job in a market where rents average $3,000, the slide from comfortable to car dweller happens with frightening speed. The safety net of severance packages is burning up against the friction of inflation and high interest rates, leaving thousands of formerly affluent professionals staring down the barrel of eviction. Simultaneously, the physical landscape of American commerce is rotting from the inside out, creating retail deserts that further erode local economies. The retail apocalypse has entered a terminal phase in 2026. GameStop, a fixture of American malls for decades, is in the process of shuttering 430 stores across 42 states, from Alabama to Arizona. The company, once a meme stock darling, is succumbing to a 95% shift toward digital sales, leaving behind empty storefronts that serve as monuments to a bygone era. But it's not just gaming, it's the anchors of the community. Macy's is closing 150 locations, ripping the heart out of malls like the Livingston Mall in New Jersey and the Grossmont Center in California. Even Dollar General, the supposed recession-proof retailer for the working poor, is closing nearly 100 locations. When the store that sells discount canned goods can no longer afford to keep the lights on due to theft and rising operating costs, it signals a collapse in the foundational purchasing power of the lowest income bracket. We are watching the disintegration of the third place, leaving communities with nowhere to gather, nowhere to work, and nowhere to shop. As the economy freezes, so does the weather, turning poverty into a life-or-death struggle against the elements. The winter of 2026 has been unforgiving, exposing the fragility of our infrastructure. In a shocking development, San Antonio, a city associated with Texas heat, was forced to open 6 overnight resilience hubs in late January to protect its homeless population from freezing temperatures. This code blue reality is playing out across the nation, from the wind tunnels of Chicago to the snow-covered tents of Minneapolis. The top 10 coldest cities for the homeless is no longer just a weather report, it is a casualty list. With federal COVID-era funding dried up, cities are running out of money to keep warming centers open. The result is snow walls built around tent encampments, medieval fortifications against the wind in the middle of modern American metropolises. The unhoused are being frozen alive in a country that has more empty luxury condos than it has shelter beds. While millions struggle to find shelter, a vicious legal war has erupted over who has the right to occupy a home. The squatter crisis has reached a boiling point in 2026, leading to aggressive legislative crackdowns that are reshaping property rights. Texas has declared open war on unauthorized occupants with the implementation of Senate Bill 38, effective January 1, 2026. This rocket docket law allows property owners to bypass the months-long eviction slog and remove squatters in as little as 10 days. The cultural anger driving this law is palpable. Homeowners are terrified of returning from a vacation to find strangers changing the locks, a fear validated by high-profile cases like the squatter in a $2.3 million Maryland mansion. However, this legal hammer swings both ways. Tenant advocates warn that in the rush to purge squatters, legitimate tenants, victims of unlicensed landlords or clerical errors, are being caught in the crossfire, thrown onto the street by a system that values speed over due process. It is a war of all against all, fought in the living rooms of America. For those who still have a roof, the threat of losing their lifeline to the outside world, their car, looms larger than ever. The repo apocalypse is surging, with car repossessions hitting a 15-year high. Over 2.2 million vehicles have been seized by lenders, a number that is expected to climb past 3 million. This is a crisis of negative equity, where Americans, desperate for transportation during the post-pandemic inflation spike, signed predatory loans for cars they can no longer afford. With interest rates for used cars averaging over 11%, the monthly payment has become a noose. Technology has weaponized the repo industry. License plate readers and GPS kill switches allow lenders to track and disable vehicles with ruthless efficiency. In a country with crumbling public transit, losing a car is often the final domino before losing a job. It traps the working poor in a localized radius of poverty, unable to commute to the few jobs that remain. Nowhere is the urban collapse more visible than in San Francisco, the city that has become the global poster child for the doom loop. The vacancy rate in downtown San Francisco has hit a record-breaking 36% in January 2026. The San Francisco Center, formerly the Westfield Mall, stands as a hollowed-out shell, a ghost town in the center of a city that once led the world in innovation. The exodus of capital is staggering. Between 2020 and 2023, 430,000 residents fled California, and that number grew by another 250,000 in 2024. They are taking their tax dollars with them, leaving the city in a fiscal death spiral. The desperate city government is now offering free rent promotions to businesses, a frantic attempt to stop the bleeding that reeks of surrender. This is not just a market correction. It is the unraveling of the urban social contract. When the tax base leaves, the services stop. The police, the sanitation, the mental health outreach. creating a vacuum that is quickly filled by crime and decay. However, the Great Migration out of blue states like California and New York is hitting a wall of regret in 2026. The popular narrative that moving to Florida or Texas is the solution to financial woes is collapsing under the weight of new data. Florida now holds the highest foreclosure rate in the United States, with 1 in every 230 housing units facing a filing. The sunshine tax, in the form of skyrocketing insurance premiums and property taxes, is bankrupting the very transplants who moved there to save money. Similarly, Texas is grappling with its own affordability crisis and the aforementioned squatter wars. The realization is dawning on the American public that there is no geographical cure for a systemic economic disease. You cannot U-haul your way out of a national recession. The fiscal storm is also battering local governments, pushing cities toward the brink of bankruptcy. The era of free money from the American Rescue Plan is over. The federal spigot has been turned off, and cities that used one-time funds to plug structural deficits are now staring off a fiscal cliff. At least 20 of the nation's 25 largest cities are facing massive budget gaps for fiscal year 2026. We are seeing smaller municipalities, like Cle Elum in Washington, filing for bankruptcy protection, serving as canaries in the coal mine for larger metropolises. When a city goes bankrupt, the first things to go are the pensions, then the parks, then the pavement. It is a slow-motion disintegration of the public sphere. This brings us back to that sidewalk in Santa Monica. The birth of a child on the cold concrete of Main Street is not just a tragedy for one woman. It is an indictment of a civilization that has lost its way. It is the culmination of every data point we have discussed: the lack of affordable housing, the failure of mental health services, the cruelty of an economy that discards its workers, and the apathy of a society that has normalized human suffering. We are living in a time of extreme contrast, where the stock market can rally while a baby is born on the street. The California nightmare is no longer contained by state lines. It is an American condition. As we move deeper into 2026, the question is not just about economics or politics. It is about morality. If a society cannot provide a warm room for a newborn, what is the value of its wealth? The data is clear, the trends are accelerating, and the asphalt is cold. The only question remaining is, are we willing to look, or will we, like the pedestrians on Main Street, simply keep walking?